Oh, my mic is still on? Professional live stream. It's me, it's the secrets. Hello, hello. Hey, Mark. Are you actually ready? I sent you a message to ask if you're ready, but you didn't respond.
I closed Slack. So hey, let's rock and roll. All right.
Let's do some.
Hello, stream.
Double. Sorry.
I only hear you once, but I've muted YouTube, so. Perfectly not jank.
We got echo, Mark. Okay, sorry, say something, Mark. Oh, crap. I know what that is. Okay, I guess it's just. Wait, why are you?
Can you? It's probably that share screen. You can mute that one.
No, it's the music replay. It replays the music, and it kind of loops the audio.
Hey, chat says we're good. So hey, we'll go with good. All right.
Okay, yeah. Well, okay, we'll just do no music then. I didn't know it's going to be a tough cookie. We'll just stick with this.
We'll have to sing our own songs then.
Yeah, exactly. You can start.
We'll start singing the song of Defects. So that is the topic of this live stream. It is the story of defects, how Wooting learns about defects, how we deal with defects, how we resolve them. And so we've got a kind of an interesting presentation set out for everybody here. I'll start off introducing myself and Jeroen as well. Everybody should know Jeroen by now. He's one of the co-founders of Wooting and the technical guy. So when it comes to all the nitty-gritty details about defects, he's the one to go to with all the very difficult questions. And my name is Mark. You may know me from, for example, the batch updates on Discord. I go by Mr. Akbar there. And so my role is in operations at Wooting. And you might be questioning, okay, so what does an operations guy have to do with defects? Well, that's kind of where we're gonna start with here today, doing some Akbarian lore. And so sit back, grab yourself a nice little beverage of your choice, and stay a while and listen.
One thing that we actually didn't really talk about before the stream, Mark, is so normally with the stream we also take questions, right? Now we want to structure the stream a bit more about us, just kind of sharing about the process within Wooting in more detail.
Yes.
How should we deal with any questions, either general ones or regarding the topic?
Yeah, so there will certainly be an opportunity for questions afterwards. If somebody has a question that is relating to what we are talking about at that very moment, then do feel free to mention that in chat. And I'll keep an eye out on chat and kind of break it up and clarify some things here and there. But if there is a question that is unrelated to the topic, then save that to the end, and we can go through some more of the traditional question and answer type things right at the very end. I do expect that there's quite a bit of ground to cover with this topic of defects. It is a very big topic, and so it may take us a little while to get through it. But if you do have questions, feel free to ask them in the chat, and if it needs to get addressed immediately, then we'll pick it up from there.
All right. I heard my audio is a bit low. Is this better? I increased it a little bit.
And while we wait for chat to confirm or deny
Hello.
Jeroen's
This is my
fabled
new
audio
level.
conundrums, we'll get
increase.
started.
Yeah.
So defects. Well, defects are a tricky topic to discuss. It's something that many companies will try to avoid the topic, or they'll kind of sweep it under the rug. They'll kind of pretend that it doesn't exist. But the reality is that every mass manufactured product will have defects in some way, shape, or form. And one of Wooting's core values is transparency. That's really important to us as a business. And so we want to share about kind of what our process is, how we consider things, even though maybe this is an uncomfortable topic to discuss for a business. So as we get started here, we're gonna start with, why am I talking about defects in the first place? What the heck does an operations guy have to do with it? We're gonna define some key concepts, make sure that we have a shared understanding of what exactly are the definitions of various terms that will be used. We're going to talk about how Wooting handles them, both from a standard operating procedures. So that's one of the first things we'll define there, an SOP. And then also the goal is to cut up this live stream into bits and pieces and to be able to share it to our customers as okay, so you've experienced some kind of problem. This is what Wooting stands for and how we will resolve it for you. And it's a bit of holding our team accountable as well, so that our customer service team can always present and resolve system problems, in the right way that is aligned with our intentions as a business. So a little background for myself then. Before, in the life before Wooting, I actually worked as a food scientist. I got a degree in meat science, and I worked for one of the largest agribusiness giants in the world. You've probably never heard of their name, but you have certainly consumed their products. That I am 100% certain. They have their fingers in absolutely everything. And if you haven't eaten their food, then the food you have eaten has definitely eaten their food. And so my role was in developing new meat products for well-known brands, like, for example, the meatballs in Spaghetti-O Meatballs from Campbell Soup Company. And I also worked on pizza toppings for Hormel Foods, those kinds of products. And so in that role, there is a very significant emphasis on first food safety and then food quality. And if we look at food that people eat versus keyboards, there's a pretty big difference in what is the worst case scenario when it comes to defects. When we talk about food safety, a worst case scenario, like, for example, if there is raw meat in the Spaghetti-O Meatballs, then that is a safety concern that could actually harm people. That kids could get sick. Spaghetti-Os are a product for children, and if they get sick, then that's no bueno. Whereas in keyboards, the risks are thankfully a lot less severe. If your keyboard has a defect, then you will not die in real life. Perhaps your character will die and you might lose a match, and that would suck, but it's not going to be the end of the world for you.
I would recommend anybody to Google Spaghetti-Os, because I've never heard of it. I guess it's an American thing, and it looks absolutely disgusting.
It is a product that is designed to meet a specific cost point. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, about adhering to the desired goals. It is not meant to be a premium product. It is meant to be a cheap product. And for a lot of families out there who struggle to make ends meet and who are looking to provide nutrition to their children when time is not readily available, and also money is not really sloshing around, and Spaghetti-Os is a very good option for them. And so critically important then that it must be made safe for them. And I will make sure to have a little addendum here that Spaghetti-Os are absolutely safe. They are a canned product, and so they get heated to extreme to a sterilization step so that they are perfectly safe in all cases. Nevertheless, so that's a good transition then. Thank you, Rune, into what does quality actually mean? Because there is a very big misconception about the term quality and what is high quality and what is low quality. Because quality, the definition of quality as it comes to manufacturing is the adherence to the specification. So how close does quality, or how close rather does the product meet what the desired goal was? And that's very different from the idea of premium, which is something that a lot of people will kind of have. They'll use interchangeably with quality, but it's very different. Premium products, they have the kind of the spare no expense approach to creating the best possible experience for the customers. And then quality is making sure that you produce what it is that you set out to produce. So at Wooting, we do have what we believe to be very premium products, and we have very high quality products. So we make this differentiation, but our goal at Wooting is to provide both. And so if we dig into that a little bit then, what is the definition of quality, the adherence to specification? Then what's critically important is what is that specification? And that is what Wooting communicates to our manufacturers of this is the thing that we want to produce. So I've got an example here.
That's
that's your cue, yep. So
second.
this is...
Wait. I need to find the button.
Pending.
There we go.
So this is an example of a specification that we provide our manufacturers. Now this is the specification for the Lecker switch. And it should be noted that this particular specification is back from the start of 2020. So it is 4.5 years old. This is not the current specification. This is a very outdated spec that we are sharing here for educational purposes. And the reason for that is a little bit of an aside is a company's specifications are by far the most confidential document that they can have that they can share. And the reason for that is the same manufacturer, in this case Gatoron, produces switches for many different companies, many different brands. And in that, there are differences in the expectations from Gatoron's customer, in this case Wooting, but also for other brands, and what they expect out of the product. So we create these specifications for them, and we expect them to stick to that. With that, then, we need to know that the products that are being produced are actually meeting this specification. And so how do we do that? Well, the short answer to that is we check. We take a look and we see. There are some very critical aspects of a specification that we need to, or of a product rather, that we need to check every single product for. Those are going to be for example, do the LEDs on a keyboard function? This is something that gets tested 3 different times during the manufacturing process. Same with the Hall effect sensors. And you can see in our factory vlogs that we have that in different stages during that production process, just to make sure that this is actually a functioning product that is being assembled. Some things, some products, some characteristics don't need to get sampled with 100%. And so what we do there is we'll take a kind of a representative group, a random selection of, in this case, switches, and have those get tested and measured and checking to see, does this meet what we have set out to achieve? And so the term for that, the definition for that, is acceptable quality level sampling. And this is a system that Wooting has by no means invented. Actually, the United States Department of Defense created this system back way long time ago. I think in the 60s, maybe 70s. And so it is a statistical analysis of if the products in this small group of this sample are defined as meeting the specification or not, then it is fair to assume that all of the products in the full batch will also meet that expectation. And so when we do research into those products and we look to see how close does the product meet the specifications, there are some things that are critical to the product. There are some things that are very relevant, but maybe isn't quite as critical to the functioning. And then there are some things that are useful to know, but not necessarily super impactful. So what might that look like? So we have three different types of defects. We've got critical defects, and those are the ones that are breaking functionality. For example, the Hall effect sensors, if it doesn't work, then your keyboard button won't work, and then that is a critical defect. And so that gets checked 100% of every keyboard multiple times, make sure that that is in good shape. An example of a major defect then, which is not critical, but it's still pretty important. So this is significant, but it doesn't break the product. This might be, for example, if we have a set of keycaps, say we have a set of white keycaps, and there's a bunch of blue ink dots on it. Well, I mean, the keycaps still work. You can still press the button. That still works, but it's obviously not what we want to be presenting to our customers. You get a white set of keycaps, you're not looking for polka dot. And then there are minor defects where not only have they no impact on the product itself, but they're also not really something that you would even be able to see when you're using the product. So an example of this might be if there is lube from a switch that leaks out of the switch onto the switch plate on the keyboard, you might get a little stain of lube on that switch plate. And it's not great, but once you put the keycaps on there, you're not even going to see it. So this is something that is very important to note, and it's important to keep minimal. But if there's a couple of switch plates out there that have a little bit of lube on them, that's all right. We can let those go without impacting, for example, thousands of keyboards and thousands of customers' delivery dates. So the way that we determine this is by establishing control limits. So what number out of a sample of critical defects are allowed before an entire batch is rejected? Now, typically for critical defects, that number is going to be 0. We do not allow any of those. And then we will establish those levels also for major defects and for minor defects. And there's a balance to be drawn between 0 tolerance for critical defects and some amount of leniency for minor defects. These are things that we would want to improve for a future batch, but we can allow this batch to ship without having too much concern about functional products or functional differences in products.
Okay.
So that sets a whole lot of baseline for everybody. Perhaps we should take a moment here to pause.
Take a little break.
And
that's also, I mean, I don't think Smart meant it that way. He got kind of attacked for his little statement about what's the point of this life, and it is to ask questions, because like we wanted to just kind of talk about this topic, but it's also like a bit too, like usually if we record videos, it's more like has a specific purpose, like okay, we want to show the factory, or we want to talk about certain problems or delays or those kind of things, and this was more something that we just kind of thought would be interesting for people to kind of share a bit more about in a very like fireside kind of way. Hey, kom je kijken. So that's why. But then I think now is also a good time to either ask questions, go through some questions. I have been keeping an eye on the questions, but they're mostly related to more like support kind of things, which this is not really the stream for, but we do have people in chat picking that up. So if you have support questions, feel free to at least ask, and people in the chat can try their best.
Yeah, and so this is like Tony said, like watching one of those VHS videos at school to learn about something. Well, oh no, how dare you learn something in a YouTube live stream? But indeed, this first half of the stream was very. This is what it is. Let's get everybody up to speed into a basic level of understanding of what does it mean to have a defect, how are defects measured, how are they controlled, and those kinds of things. So then once we get past that half of it, then we start to get into the good stuff. And that is going to be talking about how does Wooting handle defects. So this is going to be the bit about if you as a customer experience a defective product, what can you expect from Wooting on how this gets handled. And then we've also got a couple of stories to tell about some interesting defects that we experienced, that we maybe as a business learned some things about. And then we'll wrap up then also with a story of a defect that is ongoing. I've got to see a question here from H. So, if a batch is rejected or partially rejected, how do you tell the people who was in the batch drop? So, if it was part defective, or how do you decide who gets the non-defective parts in the batch? So um, that's an interesting question. One that's at the manufacturer still. Then there is the possibility to rework a batch, so that if, for example, there is one problem with the batch, we can identify, okay, this batch has this problem. We could rework those products to ensure that that problem gets fixed for that batch specifically. In the event of that kind of situation, then that is going to cost a bit of time, but then the batch itself is going to get eventually still shipped to customers. And it may take a couple of days, it may take a week to go through this kind of thing. But that does happen on a fairly regular basis, where we use a third party company that will go through and do quality control checks for each of our batches. And then when that happens, if they flag something, then we may have them do a 100% inspection to see, okay, how many of these products are fine and don't experience. Let's use, for example, the ink dots on the white keycaps as an example. So check 100% of the keycaps. Do they have that or not? And there might be then a good pile of good keycaps, pile of bad keycaps. And then for each batch that we do send out to customers, there is an amount of, we call it a buffer stock, or kind of extra units that we can use to resolve any kind of situation. And so we make sure that we don't oversell our products, that we can't deal with some kind of defect.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's also interesting to share that when you talk about these kind of like, what is AQL, acceptable quality limits? What was the word again? The term again? Yeah. These kind of things, they generally get tested at a very, very early phase. Like you try to do it as early as possible because, and in the factory they have like what they call incoming quality control, or IQC. And basically all the individual parts that comes in, so even like just the switch plate or the bottom case, those parts each get individually assessed for defects. So if there is a batch rejected, like a batch of bottom cases, they will never even make it into consumer products or into the customer's hands, because they ideally get identified as early as possible before they can even make it into any assembled keyboard.
Yeah, indeed. And there's another question here from Frank G. Does Wooting have a dedicated quality department? Yeah, who could that be? A dedicated quality department or formalized quality monitoring process? The answer to that is, now that Wooting has grown to the level that we do actually have people that are dedicated to quality. That is something that is new to us here in 2024. They when did usually start? Probably in July or something like that. Maybe June, like somewhere around then.
Yeah.
And her role is specifically regarding quality and ensuring that our factory partners do maintain the quality that we have expected of them. And then, as I kind of hinted towards earlier, we also use a third-party company that does the actual quality control checks at the factory in China. And we use the same company not just for our keyboard manufacturing, but also for keycaps and for cases and for wrist rests and for USB cables, et cetera, et cetera. And we've got a pretty good relationship with this company here. They have an extremely high attention to detail, so we can rely on them to flag anything that could be considered not normal or out of control. And they don't necessarily have a huge amount of technical knowledge about keyboards, for example, but that is actually a strength for them, because then their goal is to highlight anything that seems out of the ordinary, even if they don't maybe understand if there could be a reason for that being the way that it is. And so they provide us with, for every single batch that gets produced, they provide us with pictures.
A lot of pictures.
Indeed, hundreds of pictures sometimes per batch. And then they also will do all kinds of different types of testing for the characteristics So that could be about the products themselves. It could be also about how it gets packed into the master cartons and the boxes to get sent to our fulfillment centers, to make sure that the labels have all of the right certifications and those kinds of things. There's a lot that they do.
One thing that because like you mentioned that they make so many pictures and they try to like be very complete in their test, right? And one of the things I remember reading in one of the reports that they tested the wrist rest, and of course they tested the packaging and the dimensions. That's all like specification. But then a standard part of their report is a functional test. So they had like one picture where the person that was testing it had like their hands on the wrist, and it's like, okay, functional test complete.
Yes, does need wrists
yes.
to use a wrist rest. Well, that
it doesn't
I'm
need
glad
hold
that we
my hand.
passed. Nice. Okay, let's dive back into the prepared portion of defects then, because the next bit is something that is critically important to our customers, and that is how does Wooting handle defects. So, as I mentioned right at the start of this stream, for every mass manufacturing process, there is the possibility and the expectation that some of these products will be defective. And the job of quality control and quality assurance is to make sure that all of that gets spotted, gets highlighted, gets identified long before it gets to the customer. But every once in a while, there could be something that slips through the cracks. And that is to be expected. And so it is our job as Wooting to have a process by which we can ensure that we take care of our customers. And so I've got another thing to share real quick, Elon. This is your.
Thank you. There we go.
So this is a flowchart. It's actually a set of flowcharts, and this is a mostly complete. There are aspects to this that are not included in this picture, but this is how we do investigations into a particular customer's case. So looking at, what are the characteristics of the order. So how can we be sure if there's a defect or if there's something else going on? And so this is kind of, I'm not going to zoom in on it because it's not, the details of it aren't particularly relevant for this conversation, but it's more meant to show that we've got a whole lot of understanding in all the things that can potentially go wrong. And we've got resolutions for basically any possible kind of defect that can occur. And so what does that look like then? Well, if we're talking about a customer receiving a product that is defective, there are 3 different categories of where they're at in the lifespan of that product. There's receiving a product on arrival that is defective. There is a product that is kind of during the warranty period. Now, some of our products have a 2-year warranty. Most of our keyboard products for the keyboard itself is up to 4-year warranty. And we're really proud of that. That's excluding the LEDs because they tend to be a little bit finicky. And then there is the after warranty or out of warranty period. So on arrival, which is defined by us as within 30 days of having received the product, customers expect, and this is very reasonable to expect, that they receive a perfectly working product. This is a reasonable expectation. You buy something, you expect to receive it, and it works. So if that is not the case, if there's anything wrong with it, and maybe it happened during shipping, maybe it is a defect from the manufacturer, but it doesn't really matter. If there is any problem with the product within those first 30 days, then we resolve them by way of the best possible resolution for the customer. So what does that mean? Most of the time, that means that it's going to be a prepaid return and unit replacement. So even if it's just one little issue with like a sticky switch or a stabilizer that doesn't work or something along those lines, we will replace the entire keyboard unit for it because that's the most straightforward and best resolution for the customer. That does require time. We do require that our customers first return the product and then receive the replacement. The purpose of that is to ensure that it can't be abused. We don't want to send a new replacement unit to a customer and then they ghost us and they never send the old one back. And if it was defective, then that is potentially even where they could sell it secondhand on like an eBay or something and then not share that the product was defective and cause somebody else further down the road to have even more problems with it. And if it wasn't defective in the first place and they're just kind of trying to defraud us in that sense, That's why we have that requirement to first receive that product back before we ship a new one.
All these things have all happened, by the way. This is not just theory.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Just
Yep,
to
absolutely.
why we do these things, yeah.
But then the best solution for the customer is not always to send the keyboard back or whatever product it is and get a replacement. Sometimes there are other solutions that the customer may prefer. And so we will, in that case, provide kind of different options for the customer if they do self repair, or if they do for example, maybe their 60HE arrived with a scratched plastic case, but they were planning on switching it into a different third party case anyway. So at that point, it's like, why would they want to send the keyboard back just to swap out a plastic case that they're not going to use anyway, right? So at that point, we may offer a different solution, which could be a partial refund, which could be some store credit, could be, an accessory of choice, like, hey, maybe we can make things right by sending you a wrist rest, that kind of thing. Those are very case by case types of situations, but we're pretty open to that, and the intention is, within those first 30 days, it is the best possible solution for the customer, and to make it right by them. So during the warranty period, then, that is outside of 30 days, but before the warranty period expires, at that point, we resolve warranty issues by way of sending replacement parts. So, for example, if your PCBA has some kind of fault and breaks, and maybe there's a ferrite bead that goes, or maybe there's a USB port that has a problem, then we will resolve that by way of sending a replacement PCBA. The same can be said for example, if you've got a case that breaks at some point. Maybe the Lecker edition has a little cable guide underneath, and those little clips that hold the cable guide in. This is a particular pain in the butt for the Lecker edition that they can break. We would resolve that then by sending a replacement bottom case, not a replacement keyboard. And that's going to be at any point during that warranty period. So if you've got the 80HE and you just received it a month ago or something like that, then you've got full 4 years of warranty for that. We will send those replacement parts free of charge if you're in warranty, though it should be noted that there's going to be some situations where a customer's local customs may want some kind of tax payment for the particular replacement part. We do our best to make sure that tax payment is either as tiny as possible, or that we pay it for the customer. But that's not always possible, so just kind of throwing that out there, that it's almost always entirely free, except if there's a particular customs agency that is out to get their
if you live in Brazil.
civilians. Yeah, Brazil specifically.
Or Turkey. Then
Brazil,
sorry.
Turkey is those the two biggest offenders by far. And so that's in warranty. Out of warranty, or after the warranty period, our goal as Wooting is to do the best we possibly can to support these products long after they're out of that warranty period. And then also, if there is an accident, for example, if you spill your Pepsi on your keyboard, that is not covered by warranty. Or, for example, if your cat pukes on the keyboard, also not covered by warranty. Or if you make an error during modding where you break something, that is not covered by warranty either. But during that, we will attempt to provide replacement parts at a discounted price, at cost when possible. For example, with a PCBA, we'll try to give you, if you break your PCBA with, Pepsi spill or what have you, then we'll get you a replacement PCBA so that you can get you back up and running. And we will do so as long as we are physically able to do so. So a good example of this is the old Wooting 1 and the old Wooting 2s. These used optical switches, they're called FlareTech switches. These FlareTech switches are no longer possible to get manufactured. However, we before the manufacturer cut ties, we stockpiled as many as we possibly could. And at this point, we are still supporting out-of-warranty switch replacements for Wooting 1s from way back in 2016. That said, there's literally only a couple handfuls of these switches left. So we have some pretty strict limits on what we can support for customers. If somebody comes to us and says, "Hey, I've got 30 switches that need to get replaced," it's like, well, sorry, bud, but that's not going to happen. We have to consider that all of the other future potential warranty cases may also have an emergency situation. But if you need 3, 4, 5 of these old FlareTech switches to keep your old keyboard going strong, then we'll do our best to make sure that that happens for you. And that wraps up how Wooting handles warranty concerns. The last bit that we've got for... Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, there's one more thing, because kind of keeping on that Wooting 1 theme, what we also, I don't know how much of a spec or rule this is, but we also generally, like, if a person has like still an issue with the Wooting 1 that they cannot fix, we'll also try to kind of like support them transferring into a newer model, like a 60C discount or something like that. It's kind of case by case dependent, but that's also generally an approach that we can take. Oh, did you actually mention that? Because it is in your notes. I'm not sure if you brought that up.
I may have skipped over that.
Yeah. I thought that was a good approach as well. So there's definitely multiple layers to what we can support.
Yeah, indeed. And there are going to be times when, so if we go back to example of the Lecker Edition bottom case, we don't actually have any more bottom cases of the Lecker Edition available. But we do have is the bottom case for the Wooting 2. And it's almost exactly the same, with the exception that the one for the Wooting 2 is black instead of the Lecker Edition is blue. So in that case, we can provide that replacement part, even though we can't support the Lecker Edition itself replacement part anymore. Cool. All right. So the last section then is that we've got a couple of stories of defects. And I've picked 3 different defects that we experienced and investigated and resolved. Or rather 2 that we have resolved and 1 that is still ongoing, to try to give you an overview or some insight into what exactly, when we experience a defect, what that looks like, and how we can resolve those. So the first one here is part of a hardware defect that we experienced with the very first batch of 60HEs. This was back in 2021, I believe. 2022 when they were
summer 22
when they were first delivering. And what we experienced there is that
picture
picture. Yes,
picture. Oh, okay.
Zoom in on that.
You might need to zoom in a little bit. Yeah.
What we experienced is that the USB port would sometimes wobble when it's plugged into the keyboard, and that in and of itself, not a huge deal if it's a little bit loose in there, as long as it works. But unfortunately, for some of these customers, when it was wobbling, the keyboard would sometimes disconnect, or it would flash the RGB. There was definitely an issue going on here, and using a different cable did not resolve or impact the issue. And so it clearly was not part of the cable itself. It was something that was on the keyboard. And so as we look at this defect, we were investigating what is the criticality of this defect. And so that is pretty critical for this one. It is a complete loss of function. And the cost to this defect is a high cost because it requires a full PCBA replacement. That is the most expensive part on the keyboard. It's all the brains. It's all of the stuff that makes Wooting. But thankfully, it is a limited occurrence. It would only occur every once in a while. That was isolated to just one manufacturing batch, the very first batch of these keyboards that were created. And so how did we investigate this? Well, this one was ultimately pretty straightforward. We'd ask our customers to open up the keyboard, to kind of take some pictures of the PCBA, to look into, well, is it that there's like a bad solder, or is it getting abused in some way by the customer, whether intentional or unintentional? We did get some cases where a customer would be using the keyboard on the couch as a media station keyboard, and then when that happens, perhaps they'd have it on their lap with a blanket on there, and it could stress that USB port a little bit more than normal. Still within kind of what one would expect as normal wear and tear, but it was stressing this component to the point where it would snap off. But then also we had some cases where it would just sit on a customer's desk and not have any kind of movement or abuse done to it by any stretch of the imagination. And therefore, it is very clearly a manufacturing defect with that first batch. And so the resolution for this particular case was that it could only be resolved with a full PCBA replacement. It is not reasonable to expect our customers to take a USB port and solder it back onto their keyboard. That is, there are a handful of people who are interested in that kind of thing, that they're hobbyists, that they kind of love to tinker with stuff. They're willing to try it, and you know what? If you could do that, great, power to you. We do compensate for customer self-repair, that kind of thing, but that is absolutely not an expectation that we have of our customers. So we would replace the keyboard for the customer, and for this first batch, it was replacing the PCBA. And then that doesn't resolve the problem entirely, right? Like it does for the customer, but as a company, we have lots of customers and we have lots of people buying keyboards. So we need to make sure that this doesn't happen again in the future. And so we communicated to our manufacturer, hey, this is a problem that we are experiencing from our end users. This needs to get addressed in some way, shape, or form. And so then from the second production batch and onward, this was addressed from the manufacturer's perspective. And I believe they just increased the amount of solder that was being used for it. I'm not 100% sure of what the actual manufacturer's
I just remembered.
was.
I was also thinking, when you were talking about it, I was thinking, what was actually the root cause of this problem? And I think I just remembered. But I first want to say that Raquel actually recommended you can just hot glue it. So maybe we can try that next time. No, it's okay. That's a joke. That's a joke.
That's not a good idea.
She also does. But then I think what happened is that the packaging of the first batch unintentionally put some pressure on the USB port because it was sticking out a little bit. Wasn't it like that? I think there was.
That's right. Yeah, that it wasn't flush with the back of the keyboard. Yeah.
Yeah, there was something with
during shipping, we kind of like knock around and.
Yeah, there was something with like how with the packaging or with the PCB inside the case that during shipping, or at least I was there that during shipping, it would add pressure to, and it would either like damage enough during shipping or it would already be kind of cracked, and then when the customer would plug it in and out a few times, it would actually just do like the full break. I think that it was one of those things for like that was a problem for the first batch. So that's also why it was like pretty nice to start to resolve it from the second batch onwards. Mm-hmm. But then, that's just what I'm. It's been a while. But I think that's
forgive
what
us
happened.
and our old brains here. It's been a long time since the 60HG came out. Yeah. It's been years and years at this point. Raquel's got a question. Do the manufacturers always, quote, believe us right away if we tell them issues like this? Or do they try to negotiate that it's not a problem that they caused? That's a really interesting question. And what that digs into is, what is the caliber of the relationship that we have with our manufacturers? There's absolutely going to be businesses out there whose relationship with the manufacturer is that they just kind of try to point fingers, and then the manufacturer points fingers at somebody else, and then it's this whole game of Spider-Man pointing the fingers at each other. That is not the relationship that we have with our manufacturers. We are very much so in a collaborative state that we will present to them, this is what we have experienced, and we may include with that an idea of, well, we think it comes from this or that or the other, and collaboratively we'll figure out with the manufacturer of like, how do we resolve this problem? Because the problem exists. This is the problem, and we need to figure out what's the solution for it. And it's not about so much pointing fingers to say who is at fault for it, but it is about understanding how could this happen and how do we resolve it.
I would say that, yeah, I would say a few things is that first, in general, manufacturers are very, very careful with these kind of things because this is of course, like that's the core part of what they do. Like they build stuff in a very reproducible and hopefully high quality way. But having these kind of problems for a factory is a death sentence. Like if they're known for something like this, because at the end of the day, like their customers are also going to come back to them for it as well. So also in our experience, not just from a cooperation perspective, they have generally been very open to, okay, you identify these kind of issues, and they take it really, really seriously. Like the process for them and potential defects that the process can introduce is they take that so strict, like way more than you would initially think of. So I think like they definitely don't just point the finger back right away. Like they do really take it serious. Um, the only, this is not necessarily an exception, but then we haven't run into a problem like this yet. But there could definitely be a point where, let's say you're making 1,000 keyboards and they all break, like every single, let's just say like complete failure of the whole batch, and all of a sudden you're talking about a lot of money. I think then it can definitely get a lot more complicated, but luckily we've never been in like such a tight spot. But then I guess then it can definitely become more complicated. But generally, when it comes to resolving
we
these
did
kind of
get
things,
kind of close to something like that with the U9 issue that we had on the
yes,
ADHE.
that's true. I was also thinking about that one. Yeah,
That we had a particular component that we
knock on
suspected
wood.
had a problem, and we were if we were running forward with the idea that this component was the problem, we were pretty ready to go to that component supplier and raise all kinds of hell with them, including
Yeah,
the expectation that they would compensate us as a business for the cost that we would incur for the reworking and the resoldering of these keyboards. So
yeah.
that thankfully
Luckily,
that
it didn't
wasn't
happen.
the case.
Yeah,
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 indeed.
yeah.
But there's definitely going to be some times where you have to put down your foot and
Boss told me to never argue with the customer. Yeah, especially if you're like customer facing, like us with the customer, that's also in general the rule, right? Because of just like their experience in the review and generally I mean, of course, like you want your customers to have a great experience, but if you look at it from like, if you take like a purely money kind of view, it is also in general, people can do a lot more damage than replacing a single keyboard, right? So that's kind of like the very narrow-minded view, but in general, that is the rule, yeah, yeah. But I do have to say, we have definitely taken a stance against some customers because of just being completely like uncooperative to the point of like insulting, and that's where we definitely draw very, very, very red lines. I think Mark has sent a few of those, have tried to put a few of those people in their place.
yeah, indeed. And my perspective is that if a customer is respectful and polite and has some kind of wanting to collaborate to get to a resolution, then we will go out of our way to help them
For
and
sure.
ensure that they have the best possible experience. But if they start throwing insults and especially if it gets to the point of abusing our staff, then it is closing the business relationship with the customer and refunding their money and
Yeah.
blocking them from ever purchasing from us again, because we don't need that kind of negativity in
Yeah.
our lives.
Yeah.
It's absolutely the case.
Yeah.
So let that be a
Wanna-
warning to any possible customers out there who want to throw a fit. That we have our limits. But
Okay.
so let's
Next,
go into the second defect then that I
this is
want
a
to talk
nice
about.
one.
This is a really interesting story because it kind of completely changed directions halfway through. What we thought was a software defect ultimately turned into a hardware defect, and what we experienced then is the symptoms of this problem was that the keyboard, in this case the 60HE, would get stuck in restore mode, where the customer tried to restore, reset it, and then was unable to complete that process. And then a separate issue that we later found was related to this issue was that the M key in particular would have ghost inputs that it would think that it was getting pressed without actually anybody's finger being anywhere near it. We later found out that these two issues were related, but they were two separate investigations at the start. And so as we look at the criticality of this particular defect or this problem, it is a critical defect where the keyboard gets stuck and cannot be recovered easily. And then it was a high cost as well, because it would require a full PCBA replacement. We couldn't figure out what exactly the problem was, and If we are unable to resolve a problem, then the kind of the last resort resolution is we'll get them a new unit, so that if that is, that clearly then makes sure that the unit itself is not the problem. Chance of them having the same defect on a second unit is extremely small, versus if there is a problem with their individual setup, maybe that would then highlight that as well. And then this was a rare occurrence. So the criticality was pretty low from that perspective, is that only a handful of cases out of many thousands of keyboards would experience something like this. And so as we dug into these what was originally two different investigations, we would first go through kind of the basic troubleshooting steps of check the keyboard with a different cable to see if there's something going on with the USB cable getting used. Try a different computer to make sure that it's not something that is on the customer's operating system, or like a different application that's kind of interrupting the restore reset process, like those RGB apps do tend to get into the question, get into the system. And then with those not having resolved anything, then we're looking more deeply into, okay, what could possibly be going on with this particular keyboard that it's getting stuck in the restore and it's sometimes ghost pressing this M key. Can we replicate it ourselves with our units? And can we replicate it if we get a keyboard that is known to be defective shipped back to us? Can we replicate it then? And the answer to that, both of those, was no. And so if we get a known defective keyboard from a customer sent back to us, and it's perfectly fine, our immediate reaction is not to say, well, then the customer's just lying to us, that the keyboard works fine for us. But what we want to do is we want to figure out how on earth could it be possible that the customer experienced this and we can't replicate it ourselves. So we're looking towards across all the different cases that we received with this, and out of several thousand keyboards, we did get more than a handful of these cases. One of the commonalities that we found, just kind of a stroke of luck, is that we realized that these customers were all in high humidity locations, but not all of them were. So that was like it was a question of, well, is this actually a commonality, or is it just pure chance that some of them lived on the coast of places? But when we look closer into the actual shipping address of these individuals who experienced it, even if they didn't live on the coast, the ones who did experience it lived either next to a lake or alongside a river. So that theory of, well, maybe humidity has something to do with it, did hold water, so to speak. And so once we kind of figured that commonality out, then we had an opportunity to dig into what could this possibly mean for the keyboard. And that we suspected that perhaps the foam itself could be conductive if it was waterlogged from humidity. And so we did some testing. We got a bunch of these PCBAs returned back to us, and then basically soaked the foam in water and tried to operate the keyboard and see if we could get something to short out in a way that was similar to what these customers experienced. And ultimately, what we found was when we applied that wet foam to different parts of the PCBA, that we could find a particular location that it would short out for just these specific customers, and not for like random other test boards that are laying around. And so we found this specific problem, and then we investigated it under the microscope itself. And I've got a new picture to share. For so we looked at it under the microscope, and we found that there's a very specific trace that was exposed next to a drill hole.
Can you zoom this in some more? I think it's still pretty small. Let me check on stream. Oh,
I can't zoom in any more than that.
Oh, I'm not. Stop. YouTube.
So anyway, we found this particular trace was extremely close to a drill hole. And what that meant was when the PCBA got drilled for this particular board, if that drill wasn't exactly where it was meant to be, then it could actually get into the trace itself and open it up to the elements. And in this particular case, the elements meant a highly humid, and not soaked, but enough that it would short that particular spot on there. And so this is a good link back then to what is the definition of quality, which is the adherence to the specification. That drill hole is, the specification says that it is in one spot, and the tolerances for where that drill hole is actually placed does make a difference, because when Jeroen designs the PCBAs, he designs his traces to go around the holes. And so what does that mean if they put the hole somewhere else? That is a problem. So the resolution for this, for future productions, was to move the trace ever so slightly, so that even if that drill hole isn't exactly where it is supposed to be, that the trace itself won't get exposed. And then we also had a resolution for the individual customers that experience this, where they could quite literally just put a little piece of tape over this spot on their PCBA, and that would prevent any kind of conductivity from the foam from making contact with that copper and causing that short. And so that piece of customer self repair by putting that little piece of tape on there would fix the problem for these customers.
I have a few things to add there. Tidbits is like one part is also that this hole, this is also where it screws into the bottom case. So there's also a little screw that goes in here, and the screw head is actually a flat head, and so I think at the end it was a combination of like, okay, the sort of like location and size of the hole, but the actual damage to the trace was inflicted by the head of the screw, because that will go on top. And if that was also like, if there was sort of a combination where it's like, okay, the hole plus the screw ended up a certain way, then it could damage that trace and cause the connection. So that's also another sort of angle to this, is like, okay, and one thing that I think for me was kind of interesting with this whole story and the whole debugging and how we even got to the final resolution is that you hear these cases of like these things happening, and at first it's just like, oh, it could be anything. Like there's just so many things that could be, like if you hear it like once or twice, it's like, okay, well, we don't really know, maybe it's some damage somewhere, because there's so many different things that can happen with shipping or with the customer or something like that. And then you hear it more and more, and then it just kind of becomes this pattern, and then you start to dig deeper into it. And when you don't really know much, there's this endless list of possibilities. But then I also feel like people also tend to think in pretty complicated ways. As in, like, you think about like external influences or EMI or some sort of electrical interference or those kind of things.
It's extremely easy to go down the wrong rabbit hole.
Yes, exactly. And then it turns out that there's like, it's just a clearance issue of a PCB trace, which is a very like basic, should have just been caught during the PCB design process. It flew under the radar, but for maybe one reason or the other. What kind of tends to happen is like, okay, you make the whole thing, like you design the whole PCB, for example, and you keep all these little things in mind, but then you need to make some revisions because of XY reason, like maybe the hole moves or the bottom case gets a little bit of redesign or something like that, and then you need to make like little revisions, and that maybe you don't like double check afterwards that's correctly again, which I don't remember how exactly it's going to get introduced, but that generally happens. Let me give me 1 second, I need to open the door.
All right, and then so that's an issue like this. This is clearly a defect in the design process for the keyboard, that this trace was too close to that screw hole. That's something we could fix for the future batches. That's something that for the individual customer, either they could do self-repair by adding this little piece of tape, or if this is, this is not something that we would necessarily expect a customer to repair for themselves. We definitely have customers who say, I expected to receive the working thing and want you to replace it until it works. And when there is a case of a clear manufacturer's defect, such as this, then yes, we would do that replacement for them. But if they're willing to do self-repair, then we would compensate for that for them in some way, shape, or form. And then obviously, if they do a self-repair type of action, that does not impact their future eligibility for warranty. Okay, and then we've got one last defect that we want to talk about, and this is one that is currently still in the investigation stage. This is kind of a live look into where we were at with a particular research and investigation, and this is talking about the ADHE, and specifically, it is talking about the 8K polling when the keyboard freezes during use. And so that is the symptom that the customer is going to be using the keyboard either in game or just for typing. And at some point, the key inputs stop working and the RGB animations get stuck. This is a major defect from a criticality standpoint. It's not a critical defect, but it is a major defect. It's not critical because the keyboard is still usable. It is recoverable. You can just unplug it and plug it back in, and then it'll get back up and running. But it's a major defect because it is very significant. If you're in the middle of the game, you need to unplug and replug in your keyboard. Well, that's a problem. And also, this is a feature that we advertise as being something that you can enjoy and use on your keyboard. So if you can't use the 8K polling feature, then what's the point of us advertising that, right? It is the cost of the issue is not entirely known. Because we don't know yet if we are able to fix this with a firmware update, which would be of effectively no cost, other than the very expensive developer time that it takes to make that firmware update, or if it is going to require some kind of replacement USB daughter board, or if it's going to require an entire replacement PCBA. We don't know the answer to that yet. And then the occurrence of this, how frequently does this actually happen? It's very rare. We know that there are roughly a few dozen examples out of tens of thousands of units shipped. And one thing that we have learned so far about this is that not all of the examples that we've received have had the same characteristics. So sometimes it could be related to a USB device. Sometimes it could be related to the port on the motherboard. Sometimes it could be related to any other types of the connection between the keyboard and the computer. Like Diogo mentions in chat, one of our developers there. Yes, we ship some fixes in this latest firmware update, and so that's a really important thing to note, that because this has so many different potential causes to the ultimate symptom of it freezing, that there are different ways to attack the problem and to resolve the problem without necessarily resolving it for everybody, but at least resolving it for some people. So there's lots of different moving parts in this investigation. What we do know is that the device may operate fine on one computer, but not on another computer, which makes it seem that it's more USB port or operating system related than it is with the keyboard itself. Good news or bad news, depends on how you look at it. And that the issue also does not occur on 1K polling, which suggests that it's either related to the 8K polling itself, or perhaps the system that the USB uses to communicate that, which is USB high speed. Some further investigation suggests that most of the time, it's not the polling rate itself, but USB high speed that is the critical part to this investigation. But we do know that there is some impact of the quality of the USB port, whether that is going through a hub, whether that is connected directly to the computer, if it's delivering the expected power that we expect. So we have shipped some firmware to improve this. And anybody who is experiencing this freezing issue with 8K polling, we do hope that you'll use that updated firmware. I believe that is beta 4. Perhaps one of the devs can mention this in chat, which exact firmware version it is.
Check the utility change logs real quick. So that would be beta 3. Firmware version v2. Wait, I just put it in chat. This one, there we go.
And then since using the keyboard in 1K polling does work, that is the kind of the temporary solution while the developers will figure out what exactly is the issue that is going on and can be resolved. There are going to be some customers who do not accept this temporary fix as a solution to the problem, because they pay for 8K polling, they damn well expect 8K polling, right? And that's not unreasonable. For those customers, if they're unwilling to wait for the developers to find a fix to this, then we do offer them a prepaid return and refund for their product. And for anybody who has not yet purchased the ADHD and questions, is this something that I'm going to experience? That's kind of a tricky question to answer. The only thing that we can really lean back on is what is the percentage of users that do experience this. And we're talking about a few dozen here out of tens of thousands of keyboards. So it is a very low percentage chance, but it's not none. So this is something that may occur, but certainly less than 1%, and probably less than 0.2% of keyboards will experience something like this.
Did you talk about the ideas we have for resolution? I saw it in your notes. I don't.
A couple of ideas, but if you've got some more to share on that definitely goes way above my pay grade. So.
Well, wait. Hey, I thought I saw this in your notes. Well, maybe I don't know. But then there's, I mean, the first, and what we be the best. Okay, wait. One step back. This is a very complicated problem. Everything I said before about like, oh, it turns out that it's maybe very simple, like this trace next to the PCB and you just change it and you're done. This is not that. We already know, like, this is a very complicated, like, okay, this is, because as Andrew said a little bit in the chat, like USB high speed is just a very, it's a very, very fast transfer. That's also how you get very, very fast input speed. But to get that very high transfer, you need very high frequency. To get very low response time, and you also need a lower voltage compared to USB full speed. So you kind of have like these two things that make your electronics basically just a lot more complicated. And I'm seeing ghosts. Why am I seeing ghosts? And the full chain here is like, okay, you have your computer, then you have your USB cable that connects from the computer to your keyboard. There's an internal cable that connects the USB cable to the PCB, and then there's some connections on the PCB as well. And we are at the moment just kind of very deeply analyzing every single part to kind of see like, okay, is every single part good enough for USB high speed for these very high frequencies and these low voltages? It's not like we haven't done that before. As in, like we tested that before launch as well. It seemed good in most cases. It just turns out that in some use cases, it's just not good enough. So it kind of feels to me like we're now at like, when it comes to stability, we're now at a very good point where it's like, okay, for most customers, they have a good experience with USB high speed. It's just that the percentage that does not is, at least like for our comfort level, a bit too high. So that's why it's like, okay, we are reviewing every part critically to kind of improve and make sure that it's a good setup for everybody. Because like there could be simple things like somebody may have like strange hardware or uses really bad cheap USB cables, but that's also not the case for everybody that experiences this problem. High speed is higher than full speed, yes, and you can thank USB for making it even more confusing once you go beyond this. You can go into super speed or those kind of things. Anyway, so that's the part that we check, and obviously the firmware as well. And we have done pretty extensive investigation, and we're talking about. Sorry, another step back is that it's also pretty hard to reproduce, even for. If customers send back a keyboard, like we can't really reproduce it because it's so environment dependent. But we actually tried two things, which is one, make your environment worse to force the issue. And this is what mostly Rocky has been doing, where it's like he takes a lot of keyboards, plugs them in, hubs, long cables, like just try to create the worst situation. That's one. And the second thing is, and this is actually kind of lucky, we found somebody within Wooting that has this set of conditions with her setup that can also trigger this issue pretty consistently. And that combination of Rocky trying to force this and the Wooting employee being able to reproduce this in her particular setup, which is, and this is her words, a pretty janky setup, has been very useful. And this is also how we were able to come out with this firmware update as well. And I say update, not fix, because we also know that this fixes part of the problem, but not the full problem. So we are currently really focusing on keep tweaking the firmware to make sure it's stable, more stable. And the other part we're also focused on is the hardware as well. And this is a part where we hope with either replacement parts or future batch improvements to also get this, to also narrow the impact of this problem. I'd say that's kind of like the rough summary of where we are right now. But it's been really helpful to actually have, because like before we couldn't even reproduce it ourselves at all. And now we actually have some ways to do it. So we can really test things quite rapidly now. So I think when this first happened, it felt really scary because it was like, okay, we just launched this 8K polling and people are reporting problems. You don't even really know what the scope of it is, whether it's like what the percentage of the users is that are experiencing this. And also if you can't reproduce it yourself, it's also really hard to figure out, okay, what kind of options do we have to provide solutions or improvements? But I feel like where we are right now compared to ADHD launch is that I think we have a pretty good insight into the problem, where it might come from. We have ideas for solutions that we are exploring. A few of them are already live with those firmware updates. And I think at least like over time, I feel pretty confident that we can have a good grasp on it. But that's why it's also still an ongoing one. So that's kind of where we are right now.
Yes, indeed. But hopefully, throughout all of what has been shared today, that everybody has an understanding of what it means to Wooting to experience these things on a kind of on a manufacturer or producer level, and that you can have some measure of trust in our business, that we do take these things extremely seriously, even if we don't necessarily have the right answer right away for every customer, for every defect. What we do have is a pretty straightforward and defined process for how we resolve these things. And that is something that we can lean on, both in the face of defects that maybe we don't fully understand, that we have this process in place for how we can resolve things for the customer's perspective. And always, if we are unable to resolve such a thing, then we can get back to replacing the unit in worst case scenario, or if we're unable to get a keyboard working with a customer's very specific and unique setup, then we can always provide some other compensation option for that.
All right. I guess we have a moment for some questions still, and then we'll wrap it up, right?
Indeed, we've been chatting here for about an hour and a half now. So if there are any questions from the chat, now's the opportunity to let them rip.
Boom, boom, boom. Do we see anything? Oh, the NVIDIA 12-volt high power. That's the one with the connectors, right? That didn't fully connect to the
lighting
DOM.
fires in people's computers. Yeah, that was a rough one.
That was also pretty bad, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you talk about the criticality of a defect, that one is pretty extremely critical.
Yes.
With the fact that it could cause loss of life, that is a pretty scary thought. Thankfully, we've never experienced anything like that, though that is one of the reasons why we have been hesitant to step forward into things like wireless, for example, where there are batteries involved. Saw a post on Reddit, and I'm not going to talk about the specific company that whose product it was, but that was a confirmation of what all can go wrong in a worst case scenario with
Definitely a
something like a
nightmare
battery.
scenario.
Yeah,
Yeah.
dude, I do not envy their product design team and
No.
the folks on in that company that have to now deal with
Yeah.
that that situation.
Yeah, and in that case, it's probably not even the brand itself, like because all these batteries they come from same suppliers. There's
Yeah,
only very few suppliers that supply these kind of batteries.
yeah. So they implemented an off the shelf product into their keyboard that poof, went poof.
We would have to, or maybe we only need to send a PCB for the entire keyboard with allo case and switches, etc. It's really dependent on the issue that you're experiencing and what the resolution is. So if you would get a full unit as a replacement because of like total failure, or it's within that 30 days that Mark talked about earlier, then it would be the entire keyboard. But if we, let's say you have some issue that would just be a simple switch replacement or a PCB replacement, we actually don't ask you to send back those individual parts, just because it's actually more expensive to have it shipped back than is really worth anything to us. I think that's correct, right, Mark? I don't know, because
Yeah, yeah, indeed.
you're
And
more involved in this process than I am.
the way that this is considered is what is the potential resale value of the product that is getting returned after it gets refurbished versus the cost to get it returned. So something like a wrist rest, for example, where it's a relatively heavy item and the resale value of a returned wrist rest is extremely low. There's almost never any reason to get that sent back. For something like a PCBA, where this is the biggest chunk of value within a keyboard, if it is as simple as replacing an LED or replacing a Hall effect sensor, then perhaps that is something that could get returned for a refurbishment and repair type of situation, and then resold as part of a garage sale type of event. So we do tend to get PCBAs sent back, and then also for PCBAs specifically, we want to avoid a scenario where an individual is able to resell a broken PCBA as working and then potentially defraud a secondhand sale down the line.
Yeah. Did you all find that issue with one PCB which inputted W and arrow up when pressing the arrow up key? I'm not aware of this particular case, but just my guess would be, from just not knowing anything about this case at all, so don't quote me on this, is that in general with these kind of things, if it's not something that happens very often, otherwise I probably would have known about it. And arrow up and W keys are definitely like sort of move forward keys, so it sounds like a bit more of a software OS thing than it is a Wooting keyboard thing, because it's not a known thing. But then again, if this is your keyboard and you're experiencing this issue, open a support ticket. That's how you can get the best help for these kind of things. Mm-hmm. I can't like really live debug the problem right now, but that would be my guess, and that's just a complete guess. Okay,
and James got a question here of how do you handle warranty cases for people who receive a resold product, like for example, a Brazilian customer, would they still be covered if they did not purchase the keyboard from you directly? The short answer to that is yes. The long answer to that is that things like that do tend to get a little bit more complicated. What we do want to make sure is that we have a valid proof of purchase. So if you purchased your keyboard, if you live in Brazil and you purchased it through Dr. Mouse, for example, he is a Brazilian reseller who we do work with directly, then we can accept a proof of purchase from them and then have ourselves be able to provide you warranty support directly. Though there are also going to be cases where the reseller themselves, and this is more often the case in China, for example, where we have several different resellers who resell our keyboards, where we would provide replacement parts, including PCBAs, to the resellers themselves, and then they would be able to deal with warranty cases. And then with China, that would then be domestic shipments, domestic communications. We've got pretty good relationships with each of the resellers that we work with. Got a question here. I broke a screw in my Optimum case. Do you have any tips on how to get it out? Depends a little bit on what you mean by broke. If it's just
The
that you
head off.
stripped the screw, then you may be able to use the rubber band trick, where you put down a rubber band and then use a screwdriver into the rubber band to get better grip onto the head. If you broke the head off of the screw, then it does get a little bit trickier. I don't actually know what the best way to go about that would be.
Yeah, generally it's like you try to create some sort of slit in the screw through some tool, either manual or automatic, and then force a screwdriver in so that you can still rotate it out. But that's also pretty hard. You might try to be able to. Would it be strong enough to try to glue something on top and that way rotate it out? Because the screws in the case are not very tight. So I would imagine if you can apply any kind of pressure.
Off, then...
That's true. That actually might make it a bit more. Yeah. Yeah. I would actually, for this kind of thing, I would just Google because this is more of a DIY question than it is a keyboard question.
We've got one last question here from Junaid, I think is how that's pronounced. They are asking about whether or not it is possible to make Hall effect switches that are tactile. And I'm going to answer this question by not answering this question because that is spoilers. We couldn't possibly share anything about future Switch developments on stream. That'd be unreasonable.
That's Calder's job.
Right. Yep.
Yes, they need to tune into the Calder stream.
In 2 weeks, we're going to have another live stream. It's going to be the end of the year live stream. So that is going to be Calder will be there, and so that will be an excellent opportunity to try to squeeze out some juicy leaks from Calder.
But he will be strictly media trained for that stream to make sure he doesn't leak anything.
Right. 2 weeks ago, he did a stream by himself, and the first words in the stream were, "I'm not going to leak anything," and then within 30 seconds, just immediately rapid fire leaking things left and right. It was actually incredible. Speed run.
The only media training that will work for Calder is duct tape.
And on that note, had a wonderful time sharing with you guys about defects. Hopefully you guys learned something.
Training question, Calder. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, precisely. Nice. Hope you guys have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you in the next one.
Remote control shocker, I like that.